Hello everyone and welcome to something that no one will agree on. It's a tier list for every tower in TDS, including event, hardcore, and golden towers, along with the default cast. So as we go through the video, keep that in mind. This isn't just a list we threw together in 5 minutes either. We took approximately 3 total months working to make this list, just so that it could be as accurate as possible. And yes, I did say we. This was a huge project, so you'll also hear the person who helped me make this list, Braden, throughout the video. Anyways, let's go over the categories for the rankings first, to get that out of the way and to prevent confusion. Our first category is role value. Is the tower good at its intended job? Is its job useful to the team in a general match, or is it even not worth bringing? Our second category is economy. Is the tower fairly priced? Could I reasonably get it and other towers down in one match? Towers like Gatling Gun, which are extremely expensive, are going to do horrible in this category, and as such they'll lose lots of points. And our final category is adaptability. Is the tower able to adapt to multiple situations, or is it completely useless on certain maps? This is another category that's going to tank some towers' ratings, most notably military base and other spawners, due to its horrible performance on multi-lane tracks. Some towers are also going to be graded on synergies that they have with other towers. This won't reduce their points by too many if they're bad at their job, since there aren't many synergies in this game to make. However, it will be worth bringing up and therefore they will lose certain points. Otherwise though, I don't really believe it's fair to grade towers based on a whole different tower unless they have some glaring issue or are just extremely similar. On another note, we aren't going to dive deep into numbers, as that will make the video quite boring. However, we will mention each tower's most efficient level to spam along with their stats on both that level and their max level if it's not already obvious. We also sorted these towers into their respective grades, ranging from F tier up to triple S tier. This grade will be mentioned as we go throughout the list, however it won't be individually mentioned, but rather as a grouping category. Either way, let's finally get into our list. And yes, I did say our list. Disagree all you want, you can't change your opinions that easily. F tier, number 59, Paintballer. Ironically, both of the free towers you get for joining the game are better than this one. Paintballer is intended to be an early game splash damage tower, doing decent chip damage to earlier waves. The issue is that it doesn't do that at all. While it does have splash damage, it's either constantly bugging out or just not reaching other enemies because of how small the splash actually is. This leads to you getting a low damage tower with a relatively high fire rate, wasting all the money you spent on him. His most efficient level is level 1, giving you a max of 9.3 DPS for $600. Because of him never reaching anything with his splash damage though, this really turns into a 1.87 DPS most of the time. He's not even much better at max level. For about $8,500 he has a potential 123.35 DPS and a realistic 24.67 DPS. For a starter tower, 123.35 DPS seems amazing, but once again he never reaches his max pierce limit. Because yes, he has a pierce limit, even though he's a splash damage tower. Even if you hit a whole crowd of enemies, like the summons from a Necromancer, you only get credit for 5 of the hits. This tower hasn't been relevant since the pre-hardcore update, so let's not pretend like it is anymore and just move on to the next tower. Number 58, Scout. The first free tower on this list, expectedly low here too. He is the only other tower in F tier though, so at least it gets better from here. His most effective level to spam is level 3, though level 2 is also quite good. At level 3, he does 8.47 DPS for $1,350. It's not the greatest value, though it is a starter tower, so you can't ask for much. At max level, he does 22.35 DPS for $3,850. There's really not much else to say about Scout. You'll use him for your first rounds in the game on easy or casual, and then once you get better options, you'll never use him again. Realistically, he's just pretty forgettable. Let's move on to the D tier now. Number 57, Sniper. The other free tower in this game, and the introduction to cliff towers. Of the 3, but technically 4, Sniper is by far the worst. He does allow for good damage to enemies like hidden bosses on weaker modes, but quickly should be replaced. While his cost efficient level is level 1, I would recommend spamming level 3 instead, as anything before that will barely be doing any damage to enemies. At level 3 he does 8.55 DPS for $2,450 with a good 30 damage per shot. At max level this is increased to 19.92 DPS for only $6,450 with a significantly faster fire rate and 40 damage per shot. These stats seem significantly worse than Scout, being practically double the cost for the same DPS, though that approach would be failing to consider his huge 45 range at max, letting him hit almost the entirety of most maps. Something even better about him is that he's a cliff tower in a game with almost no other cliff towers. This means that even if you're playing with people with better other towers, you'll really only be wasting space for one other tower, and will be saving ground space for practically every other tower in the game. You'll also get flying detection from this, but there's no reason to use this tower in any of the modes that have flying enemies, as he will not do nearly enough damage to kill them. He definitely had potential though, as he was previously using hardcore strategies for early game flying detection. It's kind of a shame to see him this low now.
Number 56, Soldier. A bit of a disappointment. Soldier used to be good for early game even after getting turret at level 50. But since the pre-hardcore update, he's found himself falling further and further down the list. Soldier is pretty much just an upgraded scout, being another early game tower for the more simple modes. This tower, like a few others, has a burst shot system, meaning his DPS can be a bit inconsistent. His most cost-efficient level, ironically, is level 0, though it's best to upgrade him to level 2 since it's almost as cost-efficient and also unlocks the ability to hit hidden enemies. At level 2, he has a 4-shot burst, giving him 4.9 DPS for $850. This is increased to a 7-shot burst at max, giving him 33.02 DPS for $7,100. It should be noted, however, upgrading this tower to max is a horrible idea due to how bad the value is. Only get him to max if you've just started the game and only have him, otherwise you're literally just wasting your money.
Number 55, Demoman. Demoman is a tower paintballer wish to be. Unlike the latter though, Demoman actually hits multiple enemies consistently and doesn't have a pierce limit. This lets him take care of hordes in the earlier rounds and quite effectively as well. Once again, this tower's most cost-effective level is level 0, though he has a really annoying aim time system until level 3, so I'd suggest just going straight for that. For $2,850, you get 10.24 DPS with an explosion range of 4. While the explosion range makes him way better than paintball, it should be noted that 4 is still quite low, meaning he typically will only hit about 2 to 4 enemies per shot. This overall makes it quite difficult to find good situations to use this tower, however it's somewhat mitigated at max level where he reaches 33.16 DPS for $9,100, but typically is past his time of use when you'd be able to get this level, unless you use farm, in which case you either have better early game towers, or shouldn't be trusted handling your own money. Why would you buy farm this early in the game? Anyways though, Demoman is a good starter tower and is able to take out hordes in the easier modes, but definitely should not be your only damage source. On to the C tier, number 54, Executioner. It's surprising that this tower ranks so low now, as he used to be one of the best in the game. He's also the first event tower on this list too. Before you type your hate comments though, you really need to realize how awful he is now. He acts as a mid to late game tower meant to deal with hordes of enemies, but the issue is that he simply can't keep up in the modern day. His most cost efficient level is level 2, where he has a value of $452.26 per DPS. That may just sound like gibberish to someone who doesn't play the game much, but anyone who's actually looked at tower stats in this game will instantly realize that is horrible value. His flying detection doesn't redeem this either, and it actually more so hurts him. Let's get into why. Executioner's whole gimmick is that he throws an axe that chains into enemies after the initial throw. This means that most of the time he's stuck waiting for his axe to come back to him, and by giving him flying detection you're making the animation even longer as it has to go upwards, which lessens his pitiful DPS even further. This also ties into another bug that the tower has. If you attempt to speed up his fire rate through commander, medic, or consumables, it actually makes him fire slower. You heard that right. By trying to make him attack faster, he'll attack slower. If you buff his fire rate at all, it causes him to enter some sort of confused trance where he gets his axe back, which makes him awkwardly stand there for a full second with the axe in his hand, just not throwing it. Because of this, you can't use this tower with commander, because by buffing your other towers, you're nerfing this one. The best part about this tower is that if the tower doesn't hit enough enemies, this bug sometimes happens anyways. It also happens if he's just too close to the track for some reason, so you're forced to place this tower away from the track. This does encourage better usage of range, which is good, however it also limits you by forcing you to take up space for other better towers that need the space more. Assuming you never get this bug in your playtime, his damage is still at least okay. For almost $23,000 at max, you get 40 DPS. This isn't even like a sniper versus scout situation, where sniper's extra cost gives him a ton of range. Executioner's range at max is 18, which is really bad for a crowd controller, though admittedly his axe chain circumvents this issue typically. At max level his axe can also bounce 7 times total before coming back to him, which sounds amazing but isn't really that good. In the modes where you'd easily afford him, there's always going to be way more than 7 enemies that need to be taken care of at a time, so at that point you might as well just use Mortar or Rocketeer, which are just better options. You could think that he could at least be good for clearing out the first wave of hidden enemies, but for some reason they decided to not give him hidden detection until level 4, which costs over $10,000 to reach. His DPS late game is also hindered severely due to his placement limit. Just thought I'd mention that really quick. Executioner quite literally is not good at anything he's intended to do, and should not be praised at all. Number 3, Gladiator. Another fan favorite event tower, and the second one in a row on this list, Gladiator has fallen far from his previous speedrunning greatness. While he used to be great for speedrunning, he's not been buffed in years, which caused him to get power crept quite hard by the new modes. His Warrior's Call ability, which is unlocked at level 3, gives him 35% faster swing for a few seconds when used, but a while back it got nerfed, so now he has to stop swinging for about 5 seconds before doing it. This basically means you need to use the ability during the intermission period between waves, or else he'll let entire waves of enemies get past. It's best to keep him at level 0, get a decent farming situation, and then upgrade him to max level instantly, as his other levels aren't too significant. This gives him a DPS of 80 or 78.74 with the fire rate bug, for about $11,000 of value. Not too bad, but he quickly gets overrun and fallen run and above. If you want to use old Gladiator now, just use Assassin. Something cool about him though is that he can block stuns unlike Assassin. If something tries to stun him, he'll parry the attack, and then continue attacking enemies. The issue is that Gladiator's an early game tower, so you'll never have him down by the time you reach enemies that can actually stun. There's never really a reason to buff him either, with supports, as he typically doesn't have much usage, as his low range limits his capabilities from them. Number 52, Snowballer. What used to be one of the worst towers in the game is still one of the worst towers in the game. She's basically just a knockoff of Freezer without the ability. Her main gimmick compared to Freezer, however, is that she's extremely cheap, being less than $3,000 to get to max level. By herself, she can slow down enemies decently, though is significantly hindered by her single targeting. If you get multiple of her though, you can use them to freeze enemies instead of just slowing them down. Her best level is obviously max level with a max slowness of 60% for 30% for each hit for 4 seconds. If she gets off a freeze, it'll last for 2 seconds. She also does decent damage, being 25 damage per shot at max every 1.75 seconds. For a support that costs under $3,000, 14 DPS is quite good. The main issue with that Snowballer is that you need to spam to make her good, but there never really is a reason to do that, as other options like Freezer or Frost Blaster are just better at the role. Her low cost doesn't really add much to her compared to the other two though, as if you need to stun, you'd use Electroshocker, and Snowballer doesn't stun consistently enough to help Sledger get double damage much. Overall, easily the worst support tower.
Number 51, Hunter. No, I didn't forget about Hunter until this point. He's just generally not too bad anymore. The original player base may remember him as a bad tower you could get from a code, but now he can be purchased in the shop and can do good damage in games. He's not really a tower you should spam down, so I won't list those stats, but his max level is quite impressive. 120 damage every 2 seconds is quite good for a tower considered a starter tower, especially combined with its 28 range. Even better, you get that for a 14,400 value. He also has flying detection, which can make him good occasionally against flying enemies. It should be noted, however, he shouldn't be your only flying support, as you will easily get overrun later on. Other than that though, Hunter is mostly just a tower that's good before getting Minigunner and Ranger, but will then be quickly forgotten. Number 50, Ace Pilot. Originally the best cheap early game option for new players. Now it's a complete joke. Ace Pilot's gimmick is that he flies in a circle around where you placed him, doing damage as he passes by enemies. This forces you to think strategically about the best spot to put him on, but also makes him completely useless on some maps without loops. Ace's best level of spam is level 2, since it gives him good DPS and allows him to drop bombs to deal with hordes for only $1,100. At max level, he does a whole 156.26 DPS for only about $14,000, which is incredible value. The issue is that most time he won't be attacking at all, since he'll be spinning around to look for enemies. This leads to him being really horrible in most situations, as if he doesn't kill them in the first loop of his attacks, he typically won't kill them at all, and they'll get out of his range before he can attack again. Something to note that you should always have Ace Pilot spinning against the way the enemies are walking, as to guarantee you'll hit them at least once and possibly twice. Another nice thing to note about Ace Pilot is that he can provide temporary hidden detection to all nearby towers at the start of each wave. The issue with this is that he forces you to pick between using him for damage against using him as a support, as unless you're on the map like Grass Isles, you'll typically have to severely limit his range to make use of the temporary hidden detection buff. I personally think it'd be better if they allowed you to pick a spot to patrol around similar to Pursuit, as to allow players to get both abilities at once.
Number 49, Holopunk. Holopunk is the 4th event tower I've had to talk about in a row now, and spoiler alert, it's about to become 5. Holopunk is the only other tower than Snowballer to only go up to level 3, and she's definitely better than her competition. Holopunk shoots slow-moving rockets that lock onto enemies, inflicting burn damage and knockback when they hit. The rockets are so slow though that she typically cannot hit faster enemies at all, as they'll run past before her rockets hit them. On the things she can hit, however, she does quite well, or at the very least she sometimes does. The issue is that she's not that good until max level, in which she only does 27.96 DPS for an $8,500 value, and 12 of that DPS comes from burn damage, meaning that's over time. The low DPS though is mostly caused by her slow fire rate, as she does do a decent 60 damage per shot at max level, and considering her splash damage, it's not half bad. Her knockback isn't too impressive though. It's similar to Brawler's, but it has a longer cooldown due to her longer fire rate, so Holopunk can't be used as a support in that regard. Overall though, she's a decent mid-game damage dealer that is quite overshadowed by most towers. On to the B tier now. Number 48, Elf Camp. Elf Camp is a spawner tower whose gimmick is overloading the battlefield with weak summons. For early game, Elf Camp can be a good supportive role to other towers, but he typically struggles to solo early waves by himself, even on easier modes. Elf Camp typically focuses on summoning ranged units on higher levels as well, which does allow him to stack high damage dealers, but it does limit his units' collision damage, as ranged attackers don't typically have much health, and this is no exception. If he's being used for early game, it's best to get him to level 2 to unlock snowball levels for a bit of extra range support and some extra collision damage. Other than that though, in mid game, it's best to just get him to max level as soon as you can. That way you can allow Elf Camp to stack as many gunner elves as you can, which will greatly increase your DPS. If your stack of them dies, however, Elf Camp typically can't do much since he's a spawner tower, meaning you have to have good DPS ensuring that the stack doesn't die. This causes him to not fill out much of a role, as if you already have DPS to keep the stack alive, you don't need him in the first place. This makes him worse than his competitor Military Base in many ways. Number 47, Shotgunner. Shotgunner originally was dead last in this list, other than Paintballer of course, but that was because of a bug at the time where he'd pretty much never hit his targets. Now that he's fixed though, he's actually quite good. The further you upgrade him, the less cost effective he becomes, though it's generally best to get him to level 2 so that you can get his hidden detection. For $1,400 you get 16.56 DPS that can hit up to 3 enemies at level 2. It's typically ill-advised to upgrade Shotgunner, as at max he does 75.16 DPS for about $10,000, which isn't the best value, but it should be noted that Shotgunner can become extremely overpowered if he's paired with Firework Technician, especially at max level. This is because each individual shot has a chance to shoot a firework, making it so Shotgunner typically fires 2 to 4 fireworks every time he attacks, letting Firework Technician get a ton of damage off him. It's such a good strategy in fact that I've seen it let Firework Technician reach upwards of 2 million damage in Polluted Wastelands 2. Overall, he's a good tower for his price that can be made even better with Firework Technician, but he still isn't too notable in the modern day. Number 46, Golden Scout. The lowest golden skin officially makes its debut on this list right here. What used to be the best golden skin is now easily the worst, as Golden Scout just is not viable for early game anymore in any mode. His original intention was to be a reliable and quick damage dealer for early game, but he's not been buffed in years, similarly to Gladiator, and therefore he's become unable to deal with early game in the newer modes. The last saving grace he still has is he's very cheap, as you can get a solid 7.92 DPS for $900 in level 2, as well as hidden detection at this level, or if you upgrade him to level 3 you can get 19.74 DPS for $2,400. His range is subpar for his damage though, which makes it even less efficient to get his max level, which only reaches 52 DPS for just under $7,000, so it's better to either only get him to level 3 and sell him later, or just to not use him at all. Number 45, Military Base. Elf Camp's main competitor Military Base is considerably better, but he only ranks 3 places higher. Unlike the former, Military Base focuses on summoning high health single units, which allows the summons to get more value than Elf Camp's. Unlike Elf Camp as well, the Humvees and tanks are more focused on unit damage as opposed to range damage, which helps them live for longer, however they still do have good DPS. The best idea is to typically get a Military Base to level 2 or 3, and then begin to farm. Your best interest after that is to get a tank before the next main boss, and then spam level 4 military bases until you're at the placement limit. Max level military base is never really worth the cost unless you have nothing else to purchase. The airstrike ability from level 4 and above, however, can also be used for a cheap $250 to do massive damage in a small area. This can be helpful to clear bosses, or just hiddens that get past your defense, and sometimes it can hit flying, but it's kind of inconsistent. Military Base overall though is just this generic spawning tower, and is decent at what it does, but being a spawner tower limits its capabilities late game.
Number 44, Golden Soldier. Another golden skin this far down, and yet again one that used to be meta. There's really nothing that needs to be said about Gold Soldier. He's in the same situation as Golden Scout. Most efficient to spam level 2, since you get 8.4 DPS from $1,450. At max level, you get 92.59 DPS for $16,450. Upgrading to max isn't really a good idea since he's not very capable of thriving in late game. so it's usually better to just spam level 2 and then switch to using a different tower. He's only higher than Golden Scout since overall he does more damage, and his 30 burst count at max makes him better if you, for some reason, max them out. His flying detection also makes him sometimes viable, but it's rarely reliable. Number 43, Warden. Earned from Pizza Party, Warden is quite disappointing, though since the mode is so easy now, it's not much of a surprise. Warden is a mix between a melee DPS tower and a stunner, but he's not great at either. His stuns are every third hit until level 3, which is quite costly, making him a poor stunner. Past level 3, however, he still isn't the greatest, and typically can't accomplish much without either having multiple down or just having other stunners to assist him. His DPS at max reaches 177.22 for a total of about $22,000. Which isn't the best value considering it's a single target DPS rather than splash. For early game, it's best to stay on level 2 due to its low cost, though it honestly is just better to only use it at max. The game also encourages this, as at max level he gets the ability to block stuns, ensuring that during the final wave he won't get permanently stunned the whole time. Honestly though, he just costs too much, his stats aren't bad, but they aren't worth the price. Number 42, Trapper. As you'd expect from the name, Trapper places traps down in front of him that deal varying effects to enemies. Starting with his spike traps, Trapper places down spikes that deal damage to enemies that walk over them. It's important to note that spikes don't do their full damage to one enemy, but rather spread it out across them all. This makes him very unreliable when stronger enemies start to come around, though it does let him do good chip damage. His next trap, landmines, are much better, however. When an enemy steps on them, it blows up, dealing damage and applying burning to enemies around where the mine was. These can be used for high damage against crowds, and generally they are the best traps to set Trapper to. His last trap, Bear Traps, stun singular enemies for large periods of time. The issue with this is that the game encourages you to place Trapper in the back of the map to let him place more traps. But you can't get any value from the stuns if at the back of the map. This makes it so you never get a good stack of bear traps down unless you have overwhelming DPS, in which case you don't need the bear traps anyways. He's quite good for early game, though it's best to just unlock his landmines and then not touch him again. Luckily only costing $1,500 for this. The other issue is that he spends a long time placing the traps, so he has to be placed at the back. This prolongs games a lot, and therefore he doesn't see much use in casual play. Other than that though, he's not a bad tower, he's good at his job, but he doesn't do much more.
Number 41, Pyromancer. Pyromancer is a great tower for early game, though he has very apparent flaws. It's best to not even max him out, but to rather get him to level 2 as soon as you can for only $2,150, but then you should leave him alone for the rest of the game. This is because Pyromancer is mostly focused on taking out weaker hordes of enemies, rather than tankier ones, and because of this he sports low damage, however he's able to spread it out to multiple enemies very quickly. Against the first few waves of most modes, Pyromancer typically can solo all the way up to the first boss, though on higher modes you'll definitely have to damage tank some enemies like Fallen Dregs. It also should be noted that putting Pyromancer on farthest allows him to get way more value, as while he turns to face the farthest enemy, he will burn every enemy in between his previous target and his new one. This means that he'll be engulfing any enemy nearby him consistently, doing way more damage. His low base and burn damages make him a very bad for mid to late game though, and typically can be replaced for better towers. However, it should be noted that his defense melt still makes him somewhat useful during these times, but there are towers that do his job better, so typically he's not too worth to have.
Number 40, Militant. One of the towers Pyromancer can be replaced by is this one. Militant is basically a better version of Soldier, getting rid of the burst system for a more consistent DPS. His DPS is also just higher in general across all levels, and it definitely is noticeable. It's typically best to get him to level 1, as that is when he unlocks Hidden Detection. He also gets a decent 10.64 DPS for only $1,800, which isn't horrible. He can also be maxed out for decent results, though it is not recommended if you have better towers like Minigunner. At max, however, he reaches 75.95 DPS for $13,550, which isn't too great typically, but considering he gets both flying and hidden detection, he can have niche uses even past getting better towers, such as for early game and hardcore.
Number 39, Harvester. Being the second tower in the same event as Hollowpunk, Harvester was obtained from the hard mode version of the Hexscape event. Harvester isn't horrible, but definitely leaves a lot to be desired. Her main ability is to cover an area of the track in thorns, causing enemies within them to be both slowed and take damage. While this sounds good initially, the thorns don't cover much of the track, and typically won't get much value. Combined with a decently long cooldown, it's easy to see why this tower hasn't been good in a long time. Something important to note though, is that if there's a farm in range of the Harvester that is also nearby the track, it'll make the farm summon spikes with half the stats of Harvester's ability whenever she uses it. The issue with this though is that it's very difficult to organize a team of random players to place their farms in a way that would be advantageous to this tower, so getting long patches of thorns is quite infrequent. Her placement limit of 4, however, does let her consistently have one set of thorns on the track at a time, though chaining this ability does get quite annoying to have to keep doing for how little it feels like it accomplishes. Her own stats, however, aren't horrible. She has a crossbow that at max does 90 damage per shot and can hit flying, so she can be good support for that trait. Her main problem is that to get max level, you must invest almost $40,000 into her, which is not worth it at all. This effectively just means that Harvester never really gets a time to shine, as she's too expensive and too replaceable for what she does.
Number 38, Cowboy. Earned from triumphing Badlands. Cowboy isn't a horrible reward. His main gimmick is that he has to reload his revolvers, but gives you money each time he does in return. This makes him not a horrible replacement for farm, though he shouldn't entirely take farm out of your loadout unless you're using towers that have below average costs. His best level for making money is by far level 2, making $50 every 6 shots for only $1,200. This means he makes back the money you spent after 24 reloads or 144 shots, which isn't too many with how many enemies spawn in higher tier difficulties. The main issue with him, however, is that he unlocks hidden detection at level 3, but this level doesn't directly buff his money making abilities. This means that to make him a good defender, you need to invest more money into him, but he can't help reinvest back into you. His max level is quite good though, making $200 every 12 shots for a total of just over $10,000, meaning he needs to reload about 50 times or take about 600 shots. It's not the greatest value for money making, though the 46.9 DPS that comes with it benefits him a lot. His placement limit of 10 does hinder him a bit, though it's there to make sure he's not overpowered for making money and typically doesn't impact how you'd use him anyways. All in all, you should only get him to level 2 if you're using him for money. Number 37, Minigunner. One of the most well-known towers, the Minigunner is most likely the first main DPS tower you'll buy when starting the game, if you know what you're doing. The Minigunner does low damage at a rapid rate to a single target with its best level, level 2, doing 23.44 DPS for $3,750, which isn't too bad. Minigunner is good for DPSing early crowds, especially hiddens, and should mostly be used for that. He struggles a lot later in the game though, as he doesn't have enough DPS to deal enough damage to enemies such as the fallen tank, and you should instead get more reliable towers for that. His main perk is that he's not too expensive and he doesn't have a placement limit, meaning you can get good DPS off having a ton of them down at once. He does have a rev up time before shooting, though compared to Accelerator it's barely noticeable. For late game, it's better to upgrade all your minigunners to level 3 before maxing them due to how expensive the max level is in comparison to the rest of the tower. Other than that, there's not much to say. He's a good tower that you'll get early on in the game, and there's very rarely a reason not to use him until you start getting hardcore or event towers.
Number 36, Commando. One of the earliest and rarest event towers, the Commando is truthfully not too bad compared to his previous stats. Commando in his current state is even a rival to Minigunner, which before would be crazy to even think about, and in my personal opinion, he even beats Minigunner. The main flaw Commando has is that unlike Minigunner, he doesn't see much usage until max level, which makes him more of a late game tower that won't be able to do anything until then. This mostly is because of Commando's main usage coming from his ability, which is unlocked at level 3 and is only made good at level 4. His DPS outside of the ability still isn't bad though, as 113.91 DPS for only about 35,000 is only a bit worse than Minigunner, considering it is in his main usage. Just like Minigunner, he can be a solid defense for hidden enemies, though once again this is only at max level. His main benefit against Minigunners is his missile ability, which calls down missiles from the sky to strike enemies, doing 200 damage per missile at max level with 4 total missiles coming down. Each missile takes 10 seconds to recharge for a total of 40 seconds. Along with 200 damage, however, the missiles stick in the ground if you miss, and also stun enemies for 2 seconds each, totaling 8 seconds of stun for all 4 missiles, or 1/5 stun uptime. With his placement limit of 8, this allows you to effectively permanently stun enemies if you space out the consumption of your missiles, which can make him really good both as a DPS unit and a stunner. The only real issue this provides is that doing this has a high cost, when you can have other units do it for a lower cost. Electroshocker, for example, is way better stunner than Commando, and is not nearly as costly, so there's very little reason to use Commando over him in any situation, other than the superior range. This isn't to say Commando is bad, however, he's just overall a good unit who can be used decently for multiple purposes. Number 35, Freezer. The first stunner tower players may get unless they choose to skip him. Freezer is a good introduction to stuns. Freezer does very little damage and instead focuses on slowing and freezing enemies. The choice to give him a burst rifle on future levels also helps him with this significantly, as you can set his targeting to random and he'll freeze up to 7 enemies per burst. His only real issue is that you need to get him to max to get the most efficient stuns, though this is almost entirely circumvented by how he costs so little to get to max, being a total of just under $8,000. He also gets an ability that can freeze up to 5 enemies at once in a relatively large area with a cooldown of only 15 seconds. This features combined effectively allow you to get many freezers down to almost permanently stun anything that comes. So if he can permanently stun, why is he so low on the list? Well, the main issue is that almost every enemy, or at least every dangerous enemy you'd want to freeze on higher difficulties, has freeze immunity. This means that you can't really freeze the things you'd want to actually be freezing most of the time. That being said though, there are still numerous times when this freezing is incredibly helpful, as even if you can't freeze the dangerous enemies, you can freeze the less dangerous ones that are in front of it, allowing the rest of your towers to target the higher priority threat. In summary, the main use you'd want Freezer for is something he can't do, though he still proves to be incredibly useful in other places. Number 34, Slasher. Slasher is the next melee tower on the list, and he's a considerable improvement from Warden. Slasher doesn't have the ability to stun enemies, but instead gains critical hits, allowing him to do up to 4 times damage, or 240 damage per slash. He also gains the ability to do percentage damage that even affects major bosses, such as the Fallen King. This sounds insane, but in practice it ends up not being too great. Slasher's main value comes from his max level, which costs $31,550 to reach. Each hit at max level gives enemies 2 bleed stacks, which on their own do small percentage damage periodically, or large percent damage at once an enemy reaches 30 bleed stacks. The issue is that Slasher struggles to reach 30 bleed stacks on his own, and typically you'll have to get 2 to 3 of them before you can reach this. This means you'll have to spend between $60,000 to $90,000 just to unlock the main gimmick of the tower, which is horrible value. I found that against the Fallen King, the large percentage damage from reaching 30 bleed stacks would be anywhere between 2 to 10,000 damage per burst, which isn't the greatest considering the time and placement efforts it takes to achieve that amount of bleed stacks. This isn't to say that Slasher is bad though. Against bosses previous to the final one of each mode, he definitely can consistently stagger them, both through bleed but also through his 240 damage critical hits. His main issue is just that he costs way too much and typically requires full investment into him to make him worth bringing, which isn't what you want in a tower. Now we're to the B tier, so let's head into the A tier. Number 33, Cryomancer. Cryomancer was earned from the Krampus' Revenge event, and features a low damaging freeze ray that shoots a frost beam. This allows her to slow down enemies while also melting their defense. At max, she gains the ability to freeze enemies lasting 2 seconds total. Her main usage comes from her low cost, totaling just a bit under 15,000 to max out. While she can melt defense, she only can remove 33% at max, with 10% being removed every tick. This means it takes about 1 second to fully melt one enemy's defense, which isn't the greatest rate for only 33% reduction. This isn't her main usage however, so having defense melting at all is a benefit. Cryomancer as a stunner is decent, but nothing to write home about. She does effectively handle crowds though, which is where her main usage comes from. She's best paired with Sledger, like the other freezing towers, as it'll allow her to help Sledger get his Icebreaker passive faster. It should be noted however that Cryomancer is the worst ice-based tower to aid Sledger in this regard, as she focuses more on slowing than on freezing, meaning she rarely can freeze an enemy Sledger is aiming at. Cryomancer altogether though is a good stunner, but is once again hindered by how many enemies in the game have freeze immunities.
Number 32, Quick Boss. Arguably the best starter tower you'll get early on. Quick Boss is an effective tower in all regards. Quick Boss's main gimmick is his ability to summon crooks to aid you, acting as summoned units that come from the back of the map, doing small chip damage as they walk. For early game, it's best to keep placing level 2 Crook Bosses, as this level makes him summon double crooks, gives him hidden and flying detection, and gives him a decent 7.91 DPS by himself for $1,800. Combined with the damage from his crooks, Crook Boss is able to easily wipe out hordes of enemies on his own, long enough so that any teammates you play with can safely farm it uninterrupted. At max level, Crook Boss also can act as a late game tower for someone who doesn't have many other options, reaching a total of 140.63 DPS for about $26,000. The main limiting factor of this tower is his reliance on summons, along with his low placement limit. You can get a total of 5 Crook Bosses down per game, which severely limits his capabilities for late game DPS. This isn't much of an issue however, as you'll most likely either have or be close to having better late game options anyway. His reliance on summons however can make it difficult for him to do his job on multi-lane maps such as Badlands 2. This is because of how the summons will split up with each other, making their DPS inconsistent and not focused on one area. Other than these flaws though, Crook Boss easily could rise up to S tier potential, which is impressive for a free tower unlocked at level 30. He's never really a bad option, and like Minigunner, should be in most loadouts you use before getting either golden skins or hardcore towers. Just don't bring him to Badlands 2. Horrible mistake.
Number 31, Turret. Ironically, back-to-back level locked towers, this one being the one unlocked at level 50. Turret acts as a late game high DPS tower, which already presents some flaws. Filling this role means that he has a lot of competition, and unfortunately he isn't on the better side of it. For mid-game usage, he's best used at level 3, giving him an above-average 22 range, along with a good 126.58 DPS for a bit under $30,000. At max level, he reaches an astonishing 474.68 DPS, allowing him to shred through most bosses you'll encounter. Turret is faced with 2 severe limiting factors however, the first being his placement limit. You're only allowed to get 3 of them down. This means you're limited to a maximum of just under 1,500 DPS from him, which still sounds like good DPS, but brings us to his second issue. Turret is one of the most expensive towers in the game, costing $111,000 to max out. This is horrible value, and sometimes makes his placement limit not even an issue, as you won't be able to reach it anyways. Almost all other late game towers have way better value than Turret, which means that unless you just got him, he usually isn't a good choice to bring, and typically just gets forgotten about soon after getting him. Number 30, Jester. Jester acts as a support tower, providing debuffs to enemies, though he can also do decent for weaker crowds of enemies. His main gimmick is that he comes equipped with 4 different bomb types, being Fire, Ice, Poison, and Confusion. At his base level, you only have access to Fire and have to unlock the other types through upgrading him further. His fire bombs do decent damage, though they cannot take out anything tanky. Because of this, he should mostly be used similarly to Pyromancer for early game, focused on taking out weak hordes of enemies rather than tankier ones. His ice bombs aren't much better, as they slow the enemies they hit very little and easily get outshined by any other ice tower, even Snowballer. His poison bombs are where he starts to get decent, however. Anytime he throws one, it will explode onto an enemy, doing damage, and then will leave behind poison puddles for other enemies to walk through. On the first level you unlock him, each enemy who steps through the poison will take a total of 80 damage over 10 seconds, along with losing 20% defense over that period. The damage can help clear out weaker hordes of enemies when you first get it, and the defense melting can occasionally help him stay useful in late game for enemies such as the Fallen Guardian with high defense values. He's most known for his final bomb though, being the Confusion bombs. These make any enemy that is hit by them walk backwards on the track for 2 total seconds, though this has a cooldown of 8 seconds. It should be noted that these bombs do not affect bosses, meaning they cannot be used to make boss waves easier. They still significantly help during the final waves of each mode, however, as they allow for spam to move away from the boss, letting you get damage on them earlier. To max out, Jester costs about $12,000, which is quite cheap compared to most other towers. The main issue he has though is that his Confusion bombs are his main usage, but Biologist simply does the job better. This leads to him not having much usage, as his range isn't too high, meaning he won't be hitting enemies for long. He definitely is useful if you don't have Biologist though, as the Confusion bombs can save you from enemies passing your defenses at times, and he overall shouldn't be underestimated on his abilities. Number 29, Frost Blaster. Frost Blaster is essentially the better version of Freezer, being able to act both as a stunner and a mid-game DPS unit. Unlike his counterpart, Frost Blaster gains the ability to pierce his shot through enemies, making him more viable on maps with long, straight paths. At max level he does 60 damage per shot, reaching about 40 DPS per enemy for a low price of $12,000. His freeze times are about the same as Freezer, but his pierce allows him to get more freezes in a shorter amount of time, letting him be much better than his competition. Another large reason that makes him better is his detection for all 3 types, being able to hit flying, lead, and hiddens. This lets him have much more usage, even without having an ability like Freezer. His main drawback is that he heavily relies on getting value through his pierce, meaning that on maps with lots of curves, such as the loops on Polluted Wastelands 2, he finds very little value. He does synergize amazingly with Sledger though, so the two of them can effectively permanently stun enemies if you utilize Frost Blaster's pierce. Overall, he's not a bad tower, but relies heavily on the map chosen.
Number 28, Golden Minigunner. Halfway through the list, Golden Minigunner makes his debut. While definitely better than the other 2 golden skins rated so far, Golden Minigunner is such a disappointment for how much it costs to get him. Being Accelerator's main rival, Golden Minigunner finds himself constantly being outvalued in most situations. Similar to his normal counterpart, Golden Minigunner has a rev up time, which is certainly more noticeable in his golden form, though usually still isn't an issue. For nearly $6,000, you get 39.06 DPS at level 2, with good range and hidden detection coming with it. This allows him to be a good mid-game DPS before him getting his max level, and he can even sometimes be viable for early game if you have other defenses before being able to place him. At max level, he can act as a great late game DPS, having 259.26 DPS at $44,000 value. This high DPS allows him to even be viable as your main DPS source, even for modes such as Pizza Party or Badlands 2. He does come with issues though, the first being his high cost. Once again, there are simply just better options for DPS that will cost you less. Combined with him being a golden tower, you're most guaranteed to have better options by now. His other issue is how much better Accelerator is, being almost an exact upgrade that you'll most likely get before Golden Minigunner, assuming you play hardcore with other people. This leads to him just being an okay tower and nothing more, and he's quite forgettable to be honest.
Number 27, Elementalist. Elementalist, coming from the Operation Ice event, is a way better reward compared to Snowballer, another tower from the same event. Elementalist focuses on being a jack of all trades tower, which is why he unfortunately ranks relatively low. He can switch between ice and fire damage, each giving their own ability. In his ice-based mode, also known as frost mode, he gains the ability to summon an ice turret which shoots and slows down enemies. Due to a bug with the skill tree, this mode is where Elementalist becomes really broken, as his ice turret will freeze enemies consistently for over 6 seconds at a time, effectively ensuring that non-freeze immune tanky enemies will not be a threat at all. Ignoring this bug, however, this mode isn't the greatest. It does allow him to act as a stunner, though not a great one, as he has very little ways to deal with hordes, and his turrets have very little range, making them unreliable. His damage is also significantly lowered in this mode, so he isn't useful for DPS either. On his other mode, labeled as his fire mode, he becomes more focused on damage spread between targets. His damage sees slight improvements from the frost mode, though he gains added burn damage which does lots of the damage. This issue is that it means that your damage is both over time and cannot be stacked. This effectively means that he cannot be a DPS unit for tanky enemies, but rather has to be used as an option for hordes, through putting him on random targeting to spread out the burn damage. His low 144.48 total DPS for just over $30,000 isn't the greatest, and usually makes him be replaceable by Mortar or Rocketeer for his fire mode, or Cryomancer or Frostbuster for his frost mode. This is made even worse by his placement limit of 5, making him borderline useless most of the time. If you are to use him, however, it's generally best to set 1 to fire mode and the rest to frost mode. This way you get his DPS against crowds, along with a bit of stunning for your other better towers. Number 26, Brawler. The first hardcore tower appears on the list a little bit above the midway point. Spoiler alert, the next one is coming up soon as well. Anyways though, Brawler is a melee tower that focuses on stunning and knocking back enemies. Because of this, he finds very little values at level 0s and 1, and should instantly be upgraded to level 2 when he's used. At level 2, he does 24.4 DPS for a little under $2,000, along with being able to knock enemies away, letting him be a good stunner to help your main DPS units do damage for longer. On his next level, he unlocks his ability, which is the reposition ability. This lets him jump to any part of the map that you select, as well as doing damage when he jumps later on. This ability is incredibly overpowered for a melee tower like him, especially with its 20-second cooldown. Through this ability, he effectively is able to keep doing his job even once enemies get out of his range. This improves his ability even further as a stunner and ensures constant pressure on enemies all throughout the trek. It also lets him be more useful on maps that aren't as good for melee towers, such as Lay-By, as he can get the extra range he normally would on easier maps through utilizing his reposition ability. At max level, Brawler also gains good DPS for a melee unit, doing 224.27 DPS for a cheap 21,250 value. He even can provide air support, though it isn't reliable, as his reposition damage can hit flying, though he himself cannot. Because of all these factors, Brawler lands himself at a solid A tier, mostly falling short due to his short range as a melee tower, forcing constant repositioning, along with him typically not being the best option for stunning. Number 25, Assassin. Assassin is the newest tower added to the game as of this tier list release, and he currently is pretty broken for only costing 800 coins in the shop. Assassin is basically just Gladiator before being power crept, even doing the same DPS at max level. Assassin is this much higher than Gladiator, however, simply because of his better pricing, and along with him serving more usage outside of his max level than Gladiator does. Assassin has 2 passive abilities, being his Whirlwind Slash and his Fan of Knives. His Whirlwind Slash is unlocked at level 2, and triggers every 3rd slash. It trades some of Assassin's single target damage for a weaker AoE slash, allowing him to be good at clearing both strong and weak enemies, as he has sufficient options for both. His other ability, Fan of Knives, is unlocked at max level, requiring Assassin to do 500 total damage to trigger. Upon triggering, he throws 3 knives in a shotgun pattern, each hitting up to 3 targets and doing 60 damage per hit. For a low 12,000 to max out, Assassin proves himself useful at all levels for early game, though struggles more in harder modes or on later rounds. So why is he higher than Brawler? Well, he's simply just better at his role than Brawler is at his. Brawler is an okay stunner that requires micromanaging to fully utilize, whereas Assassin is currently one of the best early game towers requiring no micromanagement at all. Overall, though, Assassin most likely will lose his spot this high up, as he's almost guaranteed to get nerfed even further in the future. Get the hate comments ready for this next tower. Number 24, Accelerator. This tower simply does not deserve the title of being one of the best in the game, as the community loves to give it. Accelerator acts similarly to Gold Minigunner, though he does significantly more damage with the added gimmick of an overcharge meter, or effectively an ammo limit. Accelerator finds usage at almost all of his levels, though he's best at levels 2 and 5. At level 2, Accelerator gets a large overcharge meter, allowing him to attack longer. This also gives him a clean 45.05 DPS for $8,000. At this level, he mostly can use to clean up tankier hordes of enemies, as he does a good amount of damage per burst, though he is hindered at this role by his lock-on mechanic, which forces him into attacking one enemy until it either gets out of his range or it dies. While this does let him do better against bosses, it means he will not kill anything summoned by them, and therefore you'll usually die from this if you don't have any other DPS units. At max level, Accelerator gets an absolutely crazy 100 damage every 10th of a second for $60,000. Surely this means he's good, right? Landing a solid 1000 DPS at max? Well, no, this 1000 DPS is cut down to 364.08 due to how the tower works. At max level, he has an overcharge of 2400, meaning he can do 2400 damage at a time before having to reload. Whenever he does reload, he goes into an animation of him cooling down the gun that lasts 2.5 seconds, before going into another animation of him charging his shot at an enemy, lasting another 1.5 seconds. This means you have to wait 4 seconds for him to start firing again once he reaches his max overcharge. Combining this with how it takes him 2.4 seconds to reach max overcharge at max level, you get a tower who most of the time is not firing at enemies at all, and is just permanently stuck in animations. Buffing him with Commander, Medic, or DJ makes him shoot for even less time due to the fire rate or damage buffs he'll gain. In my opinion, Golden Minigunner is a more reliable DPS unit for late game because of this, though Accelerator still ranks higher due to his DPS admittedly can wipe out hordes quickly. You just need to be really cautious when using this tower, as if you make one wrong move, your Accelerator is going to lock onto a tanky boss, causing you to die from the spam. I advise setting 1 or 2 of them on weakest targeting for spam, but this isn't necessary if you already have other options for that. Overall, Accelerator is a DPS tower who does too much damage for his own good and ends up hurting himself because of it.
Number 23, Pursuit, the third of the 6 level lock towers on the list. Pursuit reaches this high on the list. Pursuit's main gimmick is being able to fly around the map, similar to Brawler's reposition ability. He's built to be a mid to late game DPS unit, having 2 different upgrade paths at levels 4 and 5. His top path is generally the better one, giving him a more single target based attack, though the bottom path does find itself useful if you're lacking ways to deal with hordes of enemies. Either way though, it's generally best to get him to level 3 and then wait until you can afford max level for the path of your choice, as the upgrades are both costly and don't have the best value. Pursuit's main limiting factors on the list is his lock-on feature and his high cost. Him having a feature causing him to lock on enemies similar to Accelerator causes him to sometimes let spam get by, which can be quite consequential. Combined with how it costs $50,000 to get him bottom path to max level and $70,000 for his top path, finds very little value and is usually outshined by other towers. His main redeeming factor is that he effectively has full map coverage, though depending on the map, this sometimes doesn't help him much anyways. Overall, very forgettable and usually not the best pick for any given mode.
Number 22, Gatling Gun. Gatling Gun is another level lock tower, being unlocked at level 175, though you then have to pay another 35,000 coins to unlock him. This alone makes him quite unappealing, though he does have great DPS when you finally unlock him. His best value arguably comes from his max level, letting him juice 787.04 DPS on his own, which is quite high. He also has an ability at all levels that lets you manually control him, with a side effect of also giving him Pierce for 2 extra enemies, but they will take half damage if they take damage through the Pierce. This effectively lets him reach upwards of 1500 DPS at max, with both flying and hidden detection at all levels as long as you're controlling it. In addition to this, he can be placed both on the ground and on cliffs. There are 2 reasons this tower is so low for how good that sounds though. First, you can only get 1 of them down. This severely limits his DPS and makes him usually a waste of a tower slot. The other, much larger issue is that he costs over $200,000 to get to max level, being by far the most expensive tower in the game. This means you pretty much have to focus entirely on him, and only him if you want him to serve much use throughout the game, which is really bad for a tower. His main redeeming value is that he can be combined with the Hacker Tower to create duplicate Gatling guns for much cheaper, letting his clones do decent damage. Overall though, he generally is just not worth the cost of placing him down and finds very little usage. Number 21, Commander. The final A tier tower on this list, Commander, is a support tower focused on buffing the fire rate of towers around him. His main usage comes from level 2, where he unlocks his Call of Arms ability, or also commonly abbreviated to COA, for a bit under $4,000. This massively boosts your towers' fire rates for 10 seconds, along with Commander being able to do damage during this time, but the damage is negligible. At max level, he gains the ability to summon 2 gunner APCs and a missile APC for $2,000 each usage. These can provide decent value, though by the time you unlock them, they typically won't serve much of a use towards helping you damage enemies quicker. Commander's main issue is his low range on all levels, making him unable to buff many towers at once. Combined with how he can't buff units such as Engineer's Sentries, it causes him to not find much usage later on when you unlock better towers. Before then though, he's a solid option in most loadouts and shouldn't be underestimated at all. Anyways, let's finally get onto the S tier now.
Starting off our S tier, we have number 20, which is Mortar. Mortar is the second of the 3 towers in this game that can be placed on cliffs, and is a huge upgrade from the previous one, Sniper. Mortar, as his name would suggest, controls a mortar that rains bombs down on enemies, doing massive AoE damage periodically. Being a cliff tower with explosives, he gains both flying detection and lead detection, meaning he can be a great counter to lead balloons from hardcore. Outside of this though, he still thrives in almost all modes, dealing massive damage to crowds and sometimes even being able to take them out by himself. At levels 4 and 5, he also gains cluster bombs, so let them do more damage across different enemies. They also unironically do more damage altogether than the main shot, though their spread out nature makes them less reliable. He's best at level 3, doing 55 damage per shot for about $6,000, though he unlocks his cluster bombs the next level, so he really finds usage at all levels past level 2. Overall, doesn't have many flaws other than lack of hidden detection, and is typically a really useful tower to bring.
Number 19, Toxic Gunner. Toxic Gunner, obtained from the Halloween 2020 event, is known for being one of the best stunner towers in the game, providing slowness and defense melting, along with overall good DPS to enemies. At max level, Toxic Gunner does 85.27 DPS, slows enemies by 30%, and drops their defense by 50%, all for only $18,525. For how many rolls this tower does, his extremely cheap price lands him high on the list. His main limiting factor is his single target, though the tower has to be balanced, so it's reasonable. Even with it, you could still safely argue he's completely broken, as putting him either on closest or random makes him spread out the slowness quite well, effectively giving the effect as if he were to have splash damage. He does have a burst shot until max level though, so it typically works best to either only get him when you can max him out, or get reliable DPS before placing him, that way you're not entirely relying on his slowness. Toxic Gunner would be higher on this list, though he simply just gets power cupped in the modern day by Electroshocker. Still a really good tower though, and definitely shouldn't be underestimated at all. Number 18, Hacker. Hacker is the newest hardcore tower added to the game, and similar to the others, ranks quite high on the list. She comes equipped with multi-target siphons, slowing abilities, extra cash from enemy kills, unit summoning, and tower cloning. Starting with her money increase ability known as Wire Fraud, it's easily her worst ability. It starts at 7.5% and reaches a maximum of either 12.5 or 20%, depending on the path you choose for a final upgrade. This low percentage leads the ability to be quite useless outside of early game, and thus it's usually left unnoticed. Her slowing maxes out at either 25 or 15%, once again depending on her final upgrade. This combined with her multiple siphons allows her to slow down enemies relatively well, though she shouldn't be used as your primary tower to slow enemies if that's what you're looking for. You can boost her slowing usage though if you get max level bottom path instead of targeting to strongest, as you won't lose much damage from holograms in this path, and it'll let you slow down the 3 tankiest enemies in her range. Her siphons themselves do decent damage, with them doing 138.89 DPS to 4 targets at max level on her top path, and 58.44 DPS to 3 targets on her bottom path. This DPS on its own isn't the greatest considering her placement limit of 2, though she isn't meant to be a DPS unit. Her main usage comes for her last 2 abilities, Unit Conversion and Tower Cloning. Whenever she kills an enemy, she'll transform the enemy into a hologram that acts as a unit, similar to the trucks from Military Base. Although this is good at max level on her top paths, the summons have very little health outside of that upgrade and typically should not be relied on for damage. That is also partially because of Hacker's relatively low range, meaning that enemies can easily slip away from her before being transformed. Her other main ability is Tower Cloning. For 90% of its original price, she can clone any tower placed by anyone on the map for 120 seconds. At her max level bottom path, this is reduced to 65% of the tower's original price. This can be really useful for when you have high DPS units with placement limits that you want more of, though it should be noted that she cannot clone other hackers. The best synergies for this include Gatling Gun, Ranger, though only if one person and one person alone brought him, Turret, Engineer, and if you're really good with timing and micromanaging, Necromancer. You should only use this ability when you get her bottom path max level though, or else you'll be wasting more money than the value the clone will provide. Due to the cooldown of the ability, you can effectively have a total of 2 clone towers per bottom path hacker at once. Her best level for early game is level 2, giving her 11.81 DPS for $3,250, along with buffing her holograms and unlocking her slowing abilities at a max of 15% with a 10% wire fraud rate. For max level, it's better to get 2 bottom path hackers if you brought towers that gain value from cloning, otherwise 2 top paths or 1 of each path will do fine. She's a great tower, but becomes less useful if you don't have towers that synergize with her, though she can still do pretty good on her own as well. Number 17, Golden Pyromancer. As you'd expect from a golden skin, Golden Pyromancer is basically just a better version of Pyromancer. Comparing the two, the only differences are that Golden Pyromancer is cheaper for early game and does slightly more damage, though it should be noted he also gets hidden detection on level 0, so that makes him more viable as well. This slight damage boost however does carry him all the way up to the top, as it allows him to shred through enemies his normal variant would struggle on, such as Fallen Dregs. He even can get good damage on early bosses like the Fallen Squire, but don't go all in with him. Just like his normal variant, it's best to get him to level 2 and then leave him alone for the rest of the match. For $1,900, you get 10.42 DPS to many enemies at once. His defense melting isn't the greatest, being only 10% at max, so the more expensive later upgrades make it not worth the hassle. Just use Electroshocker, or even better, Toxic Gunner if you want defense melting. The Electroshocker is almost just a straight upgrade to this tower in every way, so keep that in mind. Number 16, Sledger. The highest ranking ice-based tower on the list, along with the highest melee tower, Sledger wields a sledgehammer with freezing capabilities. This is his main gimmick, though he has a passive we'll talk about later as well. Something important to note about Sledger is that he cannot freeze enemies until level 3, and his damage isn't that great until levels 4 and 5, so he's borderline useless at levels 0 and 2, unless you need that 45% slowing on enemies that early on, in which case you should be spending your money on better DPS anyways. At level 3, he does 37.25 DPS, along with freezing for 1.5 seconds and slowing each enemy hit for 30%, with it capping at 60% slowness. These stats can be dished out to 5 enemies maximum, giving him incredible value considering this only costs $6,200. For a total of just over $30,000, you can increase his slowing to 80% both per hit and at maximum, increase the length of the slowness from 4 to 6 seconds, increase his freeze time to 1.75 seconds, his max hits to 7, his DPS to 139.07, not including extra damage from his passive, and unlock his Icebreaker passive. His Icebreaker passive is where he really shines if synergized with other freezing towers, as it makes him do double damage if he hits a frozen enemy. Something to note is that this extra damage from his Icebreaker passive cannot be buffed by towers like Mercenary Base or Medic, though his base damage still can. Accounting for this, it's better to pair him with supports other than these, such as Commander for faster swing rates, or freezing towers like Freezer or Frost Blaster as they allow him to trigger his passive more often. It should be noted that Cryomancer isn't that good at helping Sledger, as it mostly focuses on slowing, so I'd advise against pairing them together unless you have no other options. His max level also gives him an ability known as Aftershock, though it isn't too notable. Basically, whenever he hits an enemy, the enemy will take extra damage 0.4 seconds later, equivalent to 1/5 the damage done by Sledger. This means his 140 damage will be increased to 168, though since this isn't affected by the Icebreaker passive, it's typically not noticeable. Since he's a melee tower, he has a smaller placement ring than most towers, similar to other melee towers. This allows him to be squeezed into tight corners of the map where you can't place other towers, giving him more value. His only real downside is that he has a placement limit of 6, though this doesn't affect him much, as this is about the point where enemies become nearly permanently frozen anyways, so having extra would only do more damage, in which case you could get better options for. Easily an S tier tower, and one of the best event towers by far.
Number 15, Rocketeer. This was a hard placement, putting him over Sledger, though ultimately his cheap price in the shop places him higher. Rocketeer is a ground tower who shoots 1 to 4 rockets at enemies with large explosion radiuses. This lets him do insane damage to groups of enemies, as he reaches 260 total damage per volley of rockets at max level, which each doing 65 damage. This gives him a 94.27 DPS value per enemy for $30,000 exact, marking him as one of the cheaper explosive towers, at least compared to others like Pursuit and Engineer at their max levels respectively. Considering this explosion range is so large, he almost always will be hitting whole hordes of enemies, so his DPS usually increases massively. There are 2 things to note about this, however. First off, his splash damage roll makes him horrible for bosses, unless you're running short on other options. This isn't too bad for Rocketeer though, as his explosion radius lets him hit both the boss and any summons that it has at the same time. The much more influential aspect about him though, is that his placement limit restricts him quite a lot, making him unable to deal with spam on harder modes such as Hardcore or Polluted Wastelands 2. By the time you do these modes though, you'll typically either have help from people with better towers, or something will be able to avoid this issue entirely with Ranger splash damage at max level, so this doesn't hurt his score too much. On a final note though, it's best to set his targeting to random at max level, so this lets the 4 rockets from each Rocketeer spread out, doing more damage across multiple targets instead of wasting all their shots on one enemy. This rework made him much better, though he still fails to reach the top 10 on this list.
Number 14, Farm. I'm going to be honest with this one, Farm is only this high up if you're using him correctly, which 95% of the community cannot do for some reason. Farm is a tower that farms money for you, pretty simple. Though it technically can do damage if you place it next to the path while within the range of Harvester, the damage is negligible and only comes from this specific interaction, so you will rarely see Farm do damage. When you get all 8 of your farms to max level, you make a total of $12,000 per wave, letting you easily afford the most expensive towers in this game. This ties back to my original statement, however, that you need to use him correctly to make him work well. Somehow, people have adopted the idea that spamming level 1 farms down until you reach his placement limit of 8 is a good idea, though this could not be further from the truth. The best idea for him is to get 3 level 1 farms down, upgrade them all to level 2, then to level 3, and get 5 more level 3s one by one. You should never buy level 4 on your farm unless you're actively working towards getting it to max next wave. Once you have all your level 3s, get them to max level one by one. You can make slight changes to this strategy depending on the mode, though you should try to generally stick to this as it's the most efficient way to use him. Anyways though, we're done with the tutorial on how to use him, so why is he here instead of the top of the list? Simply put, he's not necessary half the time. Until you get hardcore towers, you'll usually have the money to get all the towers you want by the end of the game anyways, so you never really need him unless you're doing a strategy, which you never really need anyways either because of how easy the game is in its current state. The only exception to this is hardcore mode, which to be fair does warrant a farm usage, though even here Cowboy is still interchangeable. This brings me to my next issue with the towers, that Golden Cowboy and Cowboy are usually just better choices as they provide barely less money while also providing defenses. It should be noted though that last critique only applies if you're playing with a coordinated team. If more than one person is using Cowboy, the income becomes way worse than Farm, so you can't really risk using either variant of Cowboy when you're playing with random players, making Farm way more useful in that situation. Overall though, Farm is a necessity later on in TDS, but for the first half of your experience, it will be replaceable or just not needed at all. Number 13, Golden Cowboy. The economy tower talked about while discussing Farm ironically appears right after it. This tower section is going to be short, as there's not really much to say about him. He's basically just normal Cowboy, except he does more damage while also making more money, but in turn costs more overall. Because of this, it's best to get him to level 2 and then upgrade him only to level 4 rather than to max for later on, as it's not worth it. At level 4, Golden Cowboy makes $150 per 12 shots for a 7,850 price. At max level, this is increased to $225 per 12 shots, though it comes at a much pricier $17,350 value, making it not worth buying this level at all. It should be noted, however, that Golden Cowboy can act as a DPS for every part of the game, though mostly fitting into early and mid game, as there are way better alternatives for late game. Other than that though, there's not really much else to say, he's just a better Cowboy than his default variant. Number 12, Mercenary Base. Mercenary Base is the second to last spawner tower on this list, landing quite high up. His main usage is that he spawns units on the part of the track nearest to him, ranging from riflemen, demolitionists, riot shields, or field medics. Due to how his spawning works, it makes it so that he's best used when placed at the very back of a track, as it gives his units the most time to stack up, as well as removing potential blind spots from collisions with riot shields. His best unit summon is arguably the riot shield, or at least for casual play. Unlocked to level 4 for $22,000, Riot Shield charge down the track, doing 50 damage directly to enemies every 1.5 seconds is alive for, along with 1,200 total damage through collision damage. At max, this is increased to 2,500 collision damage, as well as making him do 50 damage every second instead of 1.5 seconds. With a quick 50-second spawn rate with 3 potential queues to spawn him in, you can get lots of DPS through them, proving them quite useful. Demolitionists, or Grenadiers as they are sometimes referred to, are unlocked at level 1 for $3,000, but are most useful at level 6. At this level, they do almost 80 DPS per enemy, along with 300 collision damage total. They aren't nearly as useful as riot shields typically though. If you use a tech for some towers known as microing, where you sell and repurchase tower at rapid raise, you can stack up lots of them for insane DPS to multiple enemies at once. This can be accomplished by using the airdrop ability, unlocked at level 5. This ability basically just skips the queue timer and spawns in the units you have queued instantly at any point in the track that you choose. There is a 5-ish second long animation of this though, so you do have to count for that. This leads us to microing however, as mercenary base units for some reason do not die when it's sold. This means you can airdrop Grenadiers, sell mercenary base, repurchase it, and repeat for crazy DPS from Grenadiers. Field medics also are decent, though should only be used at max level, and also should be only used if you have more than one tower summoning units. Or else it won't get much value. Field medics essentially just heal units on the track if they take damage, helping them do extra damage if they survive colliding with one enemy. Mercenary Base also gives a damage buff to nearby towers past level 3, being 10% from levels 3 through 5 and 20% at max. This lets you use him as a support tower, though it should be noted you lose much of his value as a unit summoner by doing this, unless your DPS is all the way at the back of the map, which it typically won't be. Because of this, it can prevent you from using him for his damage. Mercenary Base's only real restriction is his $72,000 value for max level, which is quite expensive. Luckily for him, he doesn't suffer much from losing value from his summons to bosses, as most abilities they do won't instantly kill Mercenary Base's units, with some exceptions such as Void Reaver Stomp, doing 5,000 damage to all units, guaranteeing all units die. Very good tower with lots of potential if used correctly overall. Number 11, Swarmer. Some may find it surprising that Swarmer is this low, though it honestly is fair placing considering his upgrades. At max level, and when spammed, Swarmer becomes the highest DPS unit in the game, being one of the 2 towers you use to solo hardcore in the modern day, as it's the only one that can solo Void Reaver consistently. This is because of his technically infinite DPS, increasing depending on how many stacks of bees are on an enemy. At max level, Swarmer can do up to 229.21 DPS, with most of its damage coming from the stack of bees applied each time it hits an enemy. Combined with his lack of a placement limit, this lets him do crazy amounts of damage extremely fast, especially for only costing a bit over $17,000 to max out. Most of his damage comes from his bee grenade ability, unlocked at level 3, and most useful at level 5. This bomb deals explosive damage and also applies many stacks of bees onto enemies with only a 15-second cooldown. Because of its splash damage, it's best to put Swarm on random targeting if he's your main DPS, that way the bombs spread out the B-stacks, allowing him to shred every enemy faster, rather than that one that will lose all the B-stacks when it dies, effectively wasting the ability. This sounds great as he's easily the best DPS tower in the game, though he ranks down at 11 instead of higher for one simple reason. He's practically useless if he isn't spammed at max level. Although he is cheap, he's horrible at early game until he reaches max level, and even then tends to struggle if he's alone. This also applies to later bosses as he struggles if he isn't spammed, and he also struggles if he isn't high enough level, which severely limits his usage. He still lands as high though, as that isn't too restricting in modern DDS due to the wide options for early game. If you're using him though, just make sure to only start placing him after you have decent early game defenses down, or else you risk dying very quickly.
Number 10, Ranger. The final and best cliff tower in the game, Ranger just barely reaches the top 10. His main usage is being a long-range DPS unit, reaching 171.23 DPS at max, with a range of 50, which is incredibly high. His most useful level is level 2, as it lets him do 140 damage per shot for just barely over $10,000, along with unlocking his passive ability to give nearby towers 15% more range temporarily. After you reach 7 Rangers, which is his placement limit, at level 2, it's best to upgrade him straight to max level. This lets him reach a staggering 1,050 damage per shot, along with an extra 150 damage explosion whenever he hits an enemy, all for only $54,000. This damage effectively lets him shut down any flying, lead, or tanky enemy, as this is the highest amount of damage in one shot from the whole game. Considering his explosion has no limit to how many enemies he can hit, combined with it having the same explosion radius as Rocketeer's rockets, it lets him also act as an insane crowd controller at times. Typically best to split half your rangers between first and strongest targeting, with one extra on first just in case for leaks or flying or lead enemies. His high damage lets him also do huge damage to bosses and can even be your main force of damage against some bosses such as the Nuclear Monster or the Void Reaser. Not much else has to be said about Ranger. His main flaw is not having hidden detection, so this can be remedied through Ace Pilot or Firework Technician, so this never really becomes an issue. So there's no doubt that Ranger deserves to be this high. Good job, Ranger! You beat 5 out of 6 Golden Towers!
Number 9, Golden Crook Boss. Here comes the last Golden Tower, Golden Crook Boss. Golden Crook Boss is mostly an early game tower, though he also finds usage in mid game and sometimes late game. This is mostly because you can use him in 2 separate ways. Like his original counterpart, he gains significant stat boosts at level 3, though it still is quite costly. Because of his stat buffs, however, he is viable to use at this level, or at least in certain situations. If you're using him for mid to late game, it's best to farm a bit, and then spam down all level 5-3 Golden Crook bosses, giving you decent DPS from him and extremely good Crook summons. This isn't his main usage, however, as that comes from early game. Because of his cheap nature, you're able to get him to level 2 within just a few waves, as he only costs $2,800. This lets you get 14.12 DPS from him along with 2 Golden Crook summons every 50 seconds, each having 25 HP and doing 4.93 DPS, while both the tower and his summons both have hidden detection and flying detection. Combined with how large his range is for an early game tower, this lets Golden Crook Boss practically defend any game mode in the early game by himself, except for some modes like Polluted, where he doesn't have sufficient DPS unless you sack summons, or Hardcore, where he doesn't have the necessary detections to deal with leads. This helps him easily reach a top 5 spot for early game, and that's without even being generous about his stats. There's not much else to say about him, he's just very good in all aspects, other than obviously not being able to target leads, but those are only a problem in 2 modes, being Hardcore and Pizza Party, so it barely even affects him at all. Number 8, Firework Technician. Earned from a relatively simple quest, Firework Technician is an extremely useful tower for any point in the game. His main usage is his Firework buff, which gives all towers in his range a chance to shoot fireworks, with the chance increasing the longer their fire rate is. This effectively means that towers like Ranger will get fireworks off 100% of the time, but what does this actually mean? Well, at max level, his best level by far due to the damage and chance of activation, this equates to a 45 damage explosion combined with a total of 140 damage from burning that is applied to anything hit in the explosion. With towers like Ranger and Minigunner, this seems like decent extra damage being added, since Ranger fires too slowly to get much value and Minigunner fires too fast for consistent firework triggers, but there's also a loophole in the calculation for the chance of triggering a firework to spawn. Towers that shoot multiple bullets at once don't receive a lower chance than they would if they were only shooting one bullet. This means that towers like Necromancer, and most notably Shotgunner, become extremely broken with this tower, with the latter being able to consistently get about 5 fireworks per shot at max level, with a less than 1 second fire rate. Due to how many bullets he shoots at once, this lets Firework Technician get crazy damage, such as what you're seeing on the screen right now. Due to the nature of his fireworks, he can also work very well all throughout Hardcore, as he can provide lead detection, though this does force you to gamble on good firework spawns if he's your only lead detection, so take that with a grain of salt. He cannot directly target flying or hidden enemies, though towers that are attacking either one can shoot fireworks to hit them, as well as dealing damage if they got caught in the crossfire of a firework aimed at a different enemy. On closer inspection though, this issue is entirely nullified anyways. Firework Technician's other main function is that he temporarily gives towers around him all detections at the start of the wave. This means that if you're solely relying on one early game tower that lacks a detection, you can get Firework Technician down to give him that detection. This allows you to, for example, let Golden Crook Boss be able to damage leads without fully relying on collision damage. On that note though, it should be noted that Firework Technician cannot give firework triggers or detections to summoned units, so he's essentially useless to things like Military Base, Mercenary Base, and to an extent Necromancer. This also applies to some other towers in the game, such as melee towers, which can receive the detection buffs but cannot summon fireworks, limiting his usage for them. This tower is still incredibly broken though, and as such has a placement limit of 1, but it simply doesn't matter. He easily reaches S tier, and I was actually contemplating putting him in SS tier, but I decided not to, due to him being not as overpowered as some of the other support towers in the game. You get close though, Firework Technician, be proud. On to the double S tier. It's at this point that we reach a tier where bringing any of these towers in any loadout almost can never go wrong. Let's just get into it. Number 7, Archer. As mentioned in the Swarmer section, solo hardcore with 2 towers is possible in the modern day of TDS, and this is the other tower that makes it possible. Archer for most of his lifespan in the game has been completely useless, though recently with his rework he has returned to how he was when he initially came out, being able to almost, if not fully, solo many of the game's modes. His piercing gimmick that used to limit him has been entirely removed, and instead his arrows ricochet to different targets now, making him much easier to use. He also has 3 different types of arrows now, unlocked at level 3, including fire-tipped arrows, shock-tipped arrows, and bomb-tipped arrows. His shock-tipped arrows, unlocked at level 4, typically find the least usage, though they can be useful when his damage starts to fall off. At max level, shock arrows are able to hit up to 5 enemies per shot, stunning anything they hit for 0.45 seconds, as long as they don't have stun immunities. Flame arrows, his first type unlocked at level 3, also share this 5 enemy limit at max level, however they focus more on damage. If they hit an enemy, they set it ablaze, doing 64 burn damage and 32 arrow damage at max level. His explosive damage are his main damage dealing arrows, getting rid of his ricochet factor but spawning a 48 damage explosion combined with the 32 arrow damage on top of the enemy it hits. Truthfully, his DPS on any of his arrows isn't the greatest, ranging between 25.44 to 63.6 DPS. This is then completely remedied when you look at his prices and detections. Through his fire and explosive arrows, Archer can hit every single type of enemy. If he's using his shock arrows, the only thing he can't hit are leads. Combined with his $12,000 total cost for max level, along with his wide range of 24, this tower is able to excel at any mode in his early game, especially with its high placement limit of 15. If this is the case though, why is he so low on the list? Well, simply put, his late game usage isn't the greatest and he has much better options that do his job better. While it doesn't affect his score, it also is just extremely boring to use this tower, at least in my opinion, as you never really face any danger until late game if you use him, unless you skip over any challenges that the early parts of the mode provide. If you are to use him, however, it's best to use fire arrows at max if you need better spread out damage, his shock arrows when his damage isn't keeping up with the later enemies and you have better defenses, and his explosive arrows when you're using him to kill one tanky enemy. Good job though, Archer. You went from one of the worst towers in the game to the top 7. Number 6, Electroshocker. I know, how is a tower that costs only 3,000 coins in the shop this high up? Simply put, he fits not only the role of a stunner, but as an early game tower extremely well. His intended usage, stunning, performs extremely well, stunning enemies for up to 1.25 seconds each, while hitting up to 8 enemies at max. This means he effectively gets 10 seconds of stun every time he shoots. Assuming he only hits one enemy though, his stuns are still good as he fires once every 2.5 seconds at max, meaning he gets 50% stun coverage all by himself. This lets him permanently stun enemies when combined with any other stunner, or even just with another one of him. His early game usage is also good, doing 10.55 DPS at level 3 to up to 4 enemies, along with a 0.3 second stun, and a low cost of $3,625. Something to note about Electroshocker though is the drastic changes between levels 3 and 4. At and before level 3, Electroshocker has a quick fire rate with short stuns and low damage. At levels 4 and 5, however, this is replaced by a longer shot that stuns for way longer, and does way more damage. So much damage in fact that at max he does 100 damage per hit. Think about that for a moment. Now actually don't think about that for a moment, there's even more. A support tower that does 100 damage per hit to up to 8 enemies, effectively doing 800 damage per shot, as well as stunning enemies for 50% of his downtime. Electroshocker is a support tower that is nearly reaching the same amount of damage that a max level ranger does, while also stunning enemies and stopping them in place for a 50% stun uptime. He also can hit both flying and lead enemies, proving him even more useful. He also removes defense, removing 15% per hit for up to 50% at max level, all for only $23,625. This tower is incredibly broken and somehow has avoided being nerfed for over a year ever since his rework came out. The only other tower on this list that has done that is the tower ranked at the number 1 spot, and he's only on about a 9-month streak right now. I'd imagine this tower will get nerfed eventually, but knowing these developers, I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps evading it for a bit longer. Number 5, Medic. Finally, we reached the top 5, and our first contestant is one of the 2 support towers that got this high. Medic recently got reworked, and while she isn't nearly as good at her previous job of preventing stuns from causing issues, the developers reworked her into a broken combination of Commander and the old John tower. At all levels, she gives any selected towers a 15% fire rate buff, as well as protecting them from any stuns that are aimed at them. At level 3, she then gains her Uber Charge ability, which on default temporarily gives towers a 20% damage increase for 7.5 seconds, but it maxes double to a 40% damage increase for 15 seconds. This combined with her 60-second cooldown on the ability is incredibly broken, as she gets a 25% uptime on her ability. She also kept her ability to heal your base's HP, and even got an ability to overheal your base. At max level, she heals 25 HP per wave, and can heal an extra 50 through overshield if your base is already at max HP. This never really is too noteworthy though, as by the time her overheal starts getting faster, you'll most likely die if anything touches your base anyways, so it doesn't really come into play at all. Her main limiting factor is how you have to select towers to gain the buff she gives. This means you cannot rely solely on microing one medic to cleanse stuns anymore, but instead have to pick and choose which towers you really don't want getting stunned. At max level, this is upgraded to 5 selectable towers for the price of $26,250. While this doesn't seem too bad, there's a cooldown between selecting towers to shield, so you can't quickly just shield your whole army when a stun is coming. You also cannot have multiple medics shielding the same tower, meaning that the fire rate buff can't stack, but more importantly, that you cannot chain Uber charges onto the same tower, unless you manually reselect the tower every time. Because of her tower selection feature, there also is no objective best level for her, as it depends on how many towers you need to shield at a time. I would generally advise upgrading her at least to when she unlocks her Uber charge ability, however, as it gives her great value for only $4,250, as well as letting her shield 3 towers. For the order of priority for shielding, I'd recommend shielding Necromancers first, for reasons we will discuss when we get to them, then the rest of your main DPS towers, specifically Accelerators first, then Commanders, and then any sub-DPS tower. Commanders may seem like a weird choice, since they can't get much value from extra damage or fire rate. However, being unable to be stunned ensures you're able to change their ability at all times, and unless you're microing them, there's no real reason not to. Medic isn't really a medic anymore, but it still is extremely broken where she is currently in the meta. Number 4, DJ. And here comes the last support tower on the list. DJ provides 3 different buffs to towers, along with being able to swap between being extra help for economy, knocking back and slowing enemies, or dealing quick damage to weak crowds. It's best to get DJ to level 3 the moment you place him down, that way his buffs have good number values, and so you can also unlock his ability, Drop the Beat, which has a short cooldown of 30 seconds. This also only costs $5,750, which is very cheap. On his green track, DJ lowers all towers' upgrade prices in range of him by 10% at level 3, along with his Drop the Beat ability, making $250 on usage, with $35 being added for each tower in his range, capping out at $600. On his red track, DJ increases all towers' damage by 12.5% if they are in his range, with his Drop the Beat ability dealing 15 damage to any enemy caught in the pulse 3 times, for a total of 45 damage. It also drops their defense by 5%, with an extra 1% per tower in his range, maxing at 25. On his purple track, DJ buffs all towers' range by 17.5% as long as they're within his range, as well as his Drop the Beat ability knocking back up to 8 enemies 3 times while also giving them slowness for 6 seconds. This slowness starts at 20% and increases by 1% per tower in range, reaching a maximum of 40%. It's typically best to keep him on his green track, assuming you aren't struggling. If you are struggling with enemy waves though, it's usually best to keep him on red, but purple can also help if you're struggling due to towers not fully covering loops, or if slower tanky enemies are causing you issues, as you can use his Drop the Beat ability to knock them back, giving your towers more time to deal with them. Level 4 isn't too good of an investment as there's barely any changes between his 3rd and 4th levels, and the price is $8,000, more than you've already invested for the previous levels, so it's typically not that great to get. Level 5, however, is extremely worth it, costing $33,750 and upgrading his green, red, and purple track percentages to 15%, 20%, and 25% respectively. It also increases the red track's Drop the Beat ability to 10% defense dropping on base, and the purple track Drop the Beat ability is slow for 10 seconds, slow by 30% on base, and 50% at max. It also gives those 2 paths 4 pulses on use of their ability instead of 3, which is decently useful. On his green track, DJ creates $750 on base now, and reaches a maximum of $2,250, with $75 extra coming per tower in his range. The most important buff at max level, however, is his Trinity buffs, which lets you use all 3 of the track's buffs at once, though at a weaker power. Putting DJ on a track will give him the base max level value for that path's buffs, though will also give you weaker buffs that the other 2 paths would provide. The values of each Trinity buffs are as follows: 7.5% lower tower troop upgrade prices, 10% extra damage for all towers, or 12.5% extra range for all. It should be noted that the Trinity buffs do not stack with the base buffs, meaning putting a DJ on its green path will only give you the 15% buff and will not add the 7.5% Trinity buff. Since DJ doesn't focus on providing buffs through his ability, it means that stunning him doesn't equate to much, which gives him great value as a support tower. Overall, DJ still remains to be an almost necessary tower in every mode, even after his rework. Number 3, Biologist. Biologist, the most recent tower one from an event, is easily the highest ranking event tower on this list. Biologist herself cannot attack, however her gimmick is that she summons plants to help defend, all with different purposes. The Sunflower is unlocked by default and is the simplest plant. It deals single target DPS, reaching up to 68.08 DPS at max, along with unlocking hidden detection at level 2. This is the highest DPS of all the plants, though in return is a single target unit and does not apply any status effects to any enemies upon hit. The Ivy is the next plant, unlocked at level 1, dealing decent damage to slow fire it with splash damage, lead detection, and poison damage. At max level, this reaches up to 37.53 DPS per enemy, with a decent explosion rate and no hit limit. The Ivy can be decent for early lead enemies, though shouldn't be relied on and isn't too good. The last plant is the Nightshade, unlocked at level 3, dealing high single target damage at a slow fire rate with the added bonus of giving enemies confusion upon hit. At max, these reach up to about 48.95 DPS. The Nightshade's main benefit is that along with its confusion, it hits flying and has an incredibly large range, reaching up to 35 studs of range. For reference, that's about 2/3 of the range Ranger has at max level. All of our plants have a lifespan of 20 seconds, having to be replanted by biologists whenever their lifespan is up. They also have good health, which prevents them from being easily killed by boss stuns. Something to note, however, is that the Void Reaver Stomp still will instantly kill them, so biologists may struggle against him if he repeatedly uses that ability. Biologist plants let her be good at every role, being a good stunner and sniper through her Nightshades, good crowd control through her Ivies, and good single target hidden detection through her Sunflowers. She's able to be good all game long as well, as she's good at early, mid, and late game. Her other main benefit is her low cost, being only $27,700 to max out, along with a high placement limit of 8. With all that being said though, why is she not at number 2? Well, it's pretty simple. Biologists cannot receive the main buffs from the supports you'd want her to, as her plants count as units and therefore do not get range, fire rate, or damage buffs. This leads to her being outshined to the next tower on the list for the late game, though honestly you can somewhat remedy this issue through proper Nightshade use, which is why she didn't rank lower than this. Number 2, Engineer. Engineer reaches the top 2 in this list, which shouldn't be surprising to anyone who's used her before. Engineer is very similar to Biologist, as she focuses on summoning sentries to do most of her damage rather than relying on herself. Without going into stats yet, one direct improvement to Biologist is how Engineer's units deal with stuns. Biologist focuses on giving her units high health to hopefully outlive the damage done by enemy stuns. The issue with this is that it makes her plants struggle to stay alive in Polluted Wastelands 2 and Hardcore, as the two modes have bosses that frequently deal high damage stuns, along with the latter having the unknown enemy which frequently deals damage through its stun. Engineer, however, deals with this differently. On level 4 and onwards, her sentries gain a shield. This makes them invincible to one stun, no matter how much damage it does. This effectively ensures that her sentries will not die to high damage stuns like Void Reavers or Nuclear Monster Stomps, allowing her to do more DPS more consistently. Getting into her stats, Engineer thrives in early game specifically at levels 2 and 4. At level 2, she gains a maximum DPS of 11.56 and a minimum DPS of 9.92 for only $1,500. This lets you easily spam her, allowing her to pretty much deal with all early game threats on her own in each mode. At level 4, her DPS ranges from 39.58 to 62.83 for $8,500, mostly through her upgraded sentries at this level. This level is better to get after getting a stable farming situation, as it can be quite costly for early game. For mid game, however, this is incredibly cheap and lets her easily be the best early to mid game tower in the game, only rival to Archer. Her max level is where she becomes an incredibly high damaging late game tower, ranging from 139.8 DPS all the way up to 390.92 DPS for $57,000, along with sentries getting rockets allowing for lead detection. On the note of detection, this is one of Engineer's only problems. She does have lead detection on base, but her sentries don't until max level. She also gets flying and hidden detection, but her sentries get hidden detection at level 5 and never get flying detection. This can lead to you struggling with detections if you're relying on her, though her high damage gun can shut down some of the smaller hordes of enemies with those detections. On another note, to build sentries she needs to get scrap metal, or essentially just damage enemies enough. This means that on longer paths, Engineer could lose her sentries when the enemies are out of her range, meaning she may have to rebuild them every round. This can sometimes become an issue, especially for early game, as she cannot attack while building a sentry, nor can a sentry attack until it's fully built, letting enemies get past her quickly. As long as you support her with other towers, though, this never becomes a big issue and isn't too noteworthy. Her max level lets her build 4 sentries total, meaning she can stack up DPS very quickly once she has all of them down. I'd personally advise putting her on strongest, that way she can get scrap metal faster to build those sentries way quicker. This leads into her issue though, which is the same as Biologist. Since her sentries are units, they cannot be buffed by your other towers. This is extremely noticeable when using her, as almost 2/3 of her DPS come from her sentries. Unlike Biologist though, it technically does help slightly to buff Engineer still, as it'll let herself do damage faster, which isn't horrible. Other than that though, she's basically just Biologist with a placement limit of 6 instead of 8 that does higher damage with the drawback of not being able to debuff enemies. If you have Biologist but not this tower, I just suggest skipping over it until it's your last hardcore tower, as the difference between the two typically isn't too notable. Anyways though, on to easily the best tower in the game. Triple S tier, the best of the best, only one tower is in this tier. Number 1, Necromancer. Keen listeners will remember that in Biologist section I asked, why is she not at number 2? Notice I didn't simply say higher up, but specifically said at number 2. That's because Necromancer is so much better than every other tower in this game, and it's not even close. Necromancer is the 3rd tower in a row on this list that summons units, and similar to Engineer requires damage to get them. Whenever Necromancer himself does 50, 60, 96, 450, or 1440 damage total, depending on his level, he will summon one group of gravestones in the track nearby him. If there is no track nearby, he won't summon at all, so make sure you place him by the track. When he uses his ability, Raise the Dead, he will transform all the gravestones he has done into skeletons, with their types varying between levels. At level 0 and 1, he only summons 2 to 4 basic skeletons. At level 2, he summons 3 basic skeletons, 3 sword skeletons. At level 3, he summons 4 sword skeletons, 1 giant skeleton, and 1 skeleton knight. And at max level, he summons 2 hollow guards, 6 skeleton knights, and 1 executioner skeleton. Keep in mind, however, this is with the maximum amount of gravestones down, as past level 0, he will not summon all the graves at once, but rather will have to summon them in multiple waves. If you are to summon early, you'll randomly get a set amount of each skeleton variant that can be summoned at that level. This means that you could get an Executioner skeleton on his first wave of graves at max level, but you might not the next time. Because of this, it's typically best to wait until he has all his gravestones down until using his ability, that way you can guarantee getting every single skeleton type at its maximum number. You also need to keep in mind that the graves have different levels that require damage to be upgraded. The strategy is very simple with them though, just simply wait for them to reach their maximum level, being 1 at level 0 through 2, 2 at level 3, and 3 at level 4. At max level, the main difference between him and the rest of the levels is that his piercing projectile gets changed out for a beam attack. This is great for him, as it means you don't need to line him up on spots where he can pierce if you're using him, and the extra beams still ensure he hits multiple targets. Even better, if he can't target multiple enemies due to not enough targets being in his range, his beams converge into one target, dealing 3 times the damage they would normally. This allows him to easily get his gravestones at max level, which is incredibly useful considering how overpowered they are. Speaking of, let's discuss his summons. Starting with the weakest, his basic skeleton has 60 health and no damage ability other than collision damage. Considering how fast you can spawn them though, this lets Necromancer effectively just be a way better level 2 military base. His next summon, the Sword Skeleton, is very similar. It has 30 extra health for a total of 90 and is able to attack. Similar to all the other skeletons with attacks, the Sword Skeleton has hidden detection. He does 20 damage every 0.8 seconds for a DPS of 24.75. The Giant Skeleton is pretty much an upgraded basic skeleton, having 600 HP and moving at about half the speed. This lets field medics from Mercenary Base heal him if he lives through colliding with an enemy, and his movement speed being low will get him great value from it. The Hollow Guard is essentially an upgraded Giant Skeleton, having 1500 HP along with 20% defense. Other than that though, he's just the same as the Giant Skeleton. The last 2 skeletons however are by far the best, being the Skeleton Knight and the Executioner Skeleton. The Skeleton Knight has 250 HP and has the same speed as the Sword Skeleton. Unlike the Sword Skeleton though, he does a whole 90 damage every 0.65 seconds, equating to 136.78 DPS with a range of 7.5. This is actually insane DPS, as at max level, Necromancer just summons 6 of these at a time. Combined with his 3 placement though, so you can have 18 of these on screen at once, equating to 2462.04 DPS, along with 4500 total HP of collision damage. You'll notice in the background footage for Necromancer that I've been using hardcore gameplay, where I had Necromancer be my main DPS, along with buffing him with other support towers. You'll see at the end of the round, but he did over 1.6 million damage, which is insane for how low of a cost he has. I then ran this back with another round later, and got over 2 million damage with the same setup. I'd estimate that at least 400,000 of this damage came from the Skeleton Knights because they are simply that overpowered. His last summon, however, is even more broken somehow. The Executioner Skeleton is only available at max level, and it's good he is, or this tower would be even more broken than it already is. The Executioner Skeleton has 3,500 HP, which through skills can be increased past 4,000. Pretty broken already, but considering you can get 3 Necromancers down, you can get between 10,500 and 12,000 HP worth of the skeleton down per wave of summons. Combine this with his Axe Throw ability, which in addition to hitting hiddens, also hits flying enemies, and does 50 damage when it contacts an enemy. With its boomerang style, this lets it do 100 damage. Or at least that's what you think it would do. The way the axe actually works is that it does 50 damage for every 10th of a second it is within an enemy's hitbox. This means it typically gets 3 to 5 hits per enemy, meaning it'll do at least 150 to 250 damage. This is also combined with it hitting multiple enemies, typically at least 10, so each throw will typically do about 1,500 to 2,500 damage total. He also throws his axe every 3 seconds. This equates to insane DPS, especially on his crowns, to the point where I'd estimate at least 1,000,000 of the total damage came from this skeleton alone. Think about that for a moment. That means that other than the Skeleton Knights and the Executioner skeleton, this tower did like about 100,000 damage across 3 different towers. That actually makes him insanely broken past level 3. Speaking of, most people think that Necromancer is only viable at max level, but that is just entirely wrong. Necromancer can actually handle early game on most modes, except for the obvious exceptions like Hardcore and Polluted Wastelands too. This does require some actual brain power unlike the rest of the game, so you won't see randoms doing well with him ever. Try getting an actually competent team though, and you'll realize his true potential. At level 3, his summons do up to 235.78 DPS, along with having 1,210 total health, letting them shred through almost any horde of enemies before you can afford his max level. This is increased all the way up to 986.89 DPS at max level, and that's with the wiki lowballing Executioner Skeleton's DPS, as well as assuming he only hits one target somehow. Using the wiki's numbers, we can estimate that this DPS on average will be increased to about 2,482.87, once again using Executioner's DPS listed by the wiki, but instead assuming he hits 10 targets total as he usually does. It's also important to remember that this DPS still doesn't account for collision damage, nor does it account for gravestone explosions, which we will discuss shortly. You'll notice that on average, I had about 5 to 6 waves of skeletons on the screen at once in the background footage. With all these waves of skeletons on the screen at once, it meant that I was doing between 12,500 to 15,000 damage per second worth of skeletons on screen, along with each wave of skeletons at max having a total of about 10,000 HP, meaning that DPS also came with 50 to 60,000 HP worth of collision damage as well. To balance this out, and I say that in loose air quotes, Necromancer himself costs $62,070 to get to max and does about 147.06 DPS, meaning his damage from himself isn't the greatest, and without buffs it'll take him about 10 seconds to make one set of graves. This barely hinders him though, as his ability to target both hiddens and flying lets him consistently get his damage meter full, along with letting him be great for defending weaker flying or hidden waves. At max level, Necromancer unlocks his level 3 gravestones, which along with summoning the higher tier skeletons previously talked about, unlocks a hidden passive that some people don't know about. If enemies are standing over the level 3 gravestone as you use his Wraith the Dead ability, then each grave creates a 500 damage explosion. Combined with 9 graves per Necromancer along with 3 total Necromancers, this means you can set a minefield of gravestones for a total of 13,500 damage whenever you want. This is the one situation where you'd want to delay summoning, as if you know your summons will not kill the enemy approaching them, and you also know you can't get 2 rounds of max graves off in time, the best idea is to wait for the enemy to come close so that you can set off the graves, letting you do exponentially more damage. Through the use of Medic, Commander, Mercenary Base, and DJ, you can also accomplish insane damage as shown in the background. The buffs from the towers will not affect the summons themselves, but instead will let Necromancer get his graves back about 3 times faster, if not more, letting him quickly send massive armies at the enemies. This tower's script was so much longer than every other tower's, I've reached 4.5 pages of writing with this, whereas all the other towers were only between half a page to a full page. The last real thing I have to say about this tower, I guess, is that people are surprisingly bad at using him. With the way random players you'll encounter use him, he honestly seems like only an S tier tower at max. Try playing with someone who really knows how to use him though, and then you'll see how good he is. And here we are again at last. That's all 59 TDS towers ranked. I initially was going to wait longer to release this video, though with the new Tesla tower they leaked being pushed back all the way to November, I decided to just finish it now before the new event comes out. Anyways, though I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments, though I fully expect it'll most be backlash from how low Accelerator is. Let me know what you think are the 5 best towers in the comments, or you can try the full list, but that'll take a while, so I doubt many, if any at all, will. I plan to make more videos in this game, though I don't think I'll get back into any sort of upload schedule, so don't count on it. Anyways, though, this has been every TDS tower ranked. I'll see you next time.